Two young Mormon missionaries, Sister Barnes and Sister Paxton, prepare to visit a designated number of people to convert them to their faith and grow the congregation. The more naive Paxton reflects on an adult film she recently watched, which made her feel pity for those in the video, as their life's purpose seemed unholy. Barnes gives the impression of being a more experienced and successful missionary. She has already converted at least 7 people. The girls set out, stopping passers-by to talk about Christ. Few people show any interest. One girl even mocks Paxton, pulling her skirt down to see if Mormon women really wear magic undergarments. Nonetheless, the girls persistently visit those who had previously shown interest in their church. They lock their bicycles to a fence near a house and head for another door, just as a storm begins. After knocking, the girls wait for someone to open the door. Soon, a smiling gentleman, Mr. Reed, appears on the threshold. The girls explain the purpose of their visit and inquire if there is a woman in the house, as their community's rules require the presence of a woman when 2 young sisters enter. Mr. Reed assures them that his wife is home, baking a pie in the kitchen. He kindly and unintrusively invites the girls inside, takes their coats, and asks if they mind the walls being lined with metal. The girls aren't bothered. Mr. Reed invites the missionaries to sit and wait for his wife and her blueberry pie, something that sounds very tempting to the girls, who are soaked from the cold rain. He then leaves the room. Left alone, the girls look around, surprised by the old-fashioned decor. Mr. Reed soon returns, promising again that his wife will come soon, and invites the girls to the table. The 3 sit down and begin discussing faith and religion. Mr. Reed asks about the girls' personal lives, and they share a little about themselves and how they found their faith. Reed displays his knowledge of Mormon teachings by pulling out their central book. Suddenly, he brings up Sister Barnes's deceased father. Paxton admits that after death, she'd like to become a butterfly and sit on the hand of someone she loves. At this moment, several lamps suddenly go out. Reed blames technical issues and awkwardly asks permission to pose an uncomfortable, even crude question. The girls agree, but the question about Mormon polygamy makes them uneasy. Mr. Reed delves into the topic, and Barnes explains that polygamy was a necessary mission during the church's formative years, as many deaths required growing the congregation, leading to men having multiple wives. Reed admits that he fears the church's founder simply used it as a cover for his immorality. Barnes argues with him, and Reed concludes that the most important thing is one's personal relationship with God. Unexpectedly, Reed shifts the religious debate to the utility of fast food. This excites Paxton, who builds a ladder ranking foods with her personal favorites at the top. Reed compares this to religion. As it turns out, he hasn't found a faith that stands on the top rung for him, but through his studies, he has learned one truth: the more you know, the less you know. He claims to be overfed with religious fast food, as they all claim to hold the truth. Unfortunately, he has found the true religion. Though the situation grows tense, the girls still hope for a peaceful resolution and once again ask Mr. Reed to fetch his wife. The man leaves, and Barnes suggests they run, having noticed that the scented candle on the table smells like blueberry pie. Just then, Mr. Reed returns and invites the girls to the kitchen to meet his wife. He leads the way, but Barnes claims they're receiving a call from their church leader and pretends to talk, promising to be there soon. The girls try to leave, but Barnes remembers that their bicycles are locked and the keys are in her coat pocket. They attempt to open the door, but it's locked. Barnes asks Paxton to climb out the window, but it's too small, and their phone call doesn't go through. At that moment, the lights in the room go out completely. The girls are forced to move deeper into the house, where lights are on and music is playing. Reed seems delighted that they have finally entered, but Barnes asks for permission to leave, as they were told on the phone to return. The man pretends to have just remembered their coats and hands them over. Barnes immediately notices her key is missing. Suddenly, it is found in Paxton's pocket. Barnes asks him to unlock the front door, but Reed explains that it is set on a timer and cannot be opened until morning. However, the girls can exit through the back door. Noticing the missionary's hesitation, he expands on the idea that everyone is free to choose their own path. He also points out that he knows they could not have received a call, as he had already mentioned the metal walls. They block all cell signals. Barnes decides to stop arguing and asks which of the 2 doors they can leave through. Reed seems puzzled. The doors look identical. Only one is labeled faith and the other disbelief. Suddenly, he poses a question. Do they still believe his wife is in the next room? Because everything suggests otherwise. The man launches into a philosophical monologue about religion and belief. He placed the blueberry-scented candle on the table because he wanted them to reflect on the things they believe in, simply because someone told them to. Barnes decides to act and heads toward the faith door, but upon opening it, she sees stairs leading to a basement. She then moves to the second door, but there too there is no visible way out. At the same time, the church elder begins to worry about the girls. Barnes, meanwhile, implores Reed to let them go peacefully, reminding him that the church knows their route and will find them soon. However, Reed suggests they discuss the question of choosing the correct door. He invites the missionaries to the table and suddenly pulls out the game Monopoly, puts on a record, and continues his story. He claims that half the people who buy the game never finish it. There's also a game called The Landlord, practically identical to Monopoly in its core principles. Reed shares the history of the game's creation, which baffles the girls, but he insists he is only trying to explain his ideas more clearly. He plays the same song again and resumes the conversation. There are 3 monotheistic religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Each one, he explains, is like a well-known game, with Christianity being Monopoly. Reed again draws attention to the song, sharing how its creators went to court to prove the melody had been stolen by another famous band. The girls are thoroughly confused but are forced to listen. Reed concludes that iterations distort the message, overshadowing the original. Judaism is the original religion, yet it has the fewest followers. Why is that? He believes missionaries are salespeople of religion, and when people let them into their homes, they engage in a conversation about buying and selling ideologies. At this point, Reed turns off the lights and, using a flashlight, points to paintings on the walls. He begins explaining that the sacred texts people revere are merely retellings of stories passed down orally by ancient people. The story of a savior performing miracles was already popular long before his birth. Meanwhile, the elder continues searching for the girls, knocking on doors, but no one has seen them. Reed goes on mentioning old gods who were predecessors to Jesus. He also draws parallels between Christian and Mormon mythology, comparing them to Star Wars. Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, which leaves the girls completely bewildered. Reed concludes that if God exists and people are entirely dependent on him, that is terrifying. But if he doesn't exist and people are left to fend for themselves, that is also terrifying. Thus, the church is either the truth or a lie. Now he tells them they can choose a door. Paxton, utterly terrified, begs Barnes to go through disbelief just to escape, but Barnes suddenly heads for the first door, convinced that Reed will not let them go. She believes he is trying to prove a truth that only makes sense to him. Right now, it is important to demonstrate her faith. With conviction, she dismantles Reed's earlier conclusions about the similarities between religions. They believe in God, and they will go through the first door. Let God decide what happens to them. The girls find themselves in a dark basement with a single window barred shut. Barnes manages to pry off a wooden board, but then they hear the sound of a door opening and someone entering the room. Barnes hands Paxton a letter opener she had grabbed earlier and tells her to stab Reed, reasoning that he wouldn't expect it from her. Their code phrase will be a reference to the magic undergarments. However, instead of Reed, a strange figure enters the basement, sets a pie on the table, and sits silently at a distance. Suddenly, music begins playing from upstairs, and the girls discover an auditory tube that connects the basement to the study. While carving wooden figurines at his desk, Reed announces that the woman sitting near them is a living prophetess. They will serve as witnesses to confirm a true miracle. Right before their eyes, the prophetess will eat the poisoned pie, die, and then be resurrected. The girls watch this process in horror. Reed orders them to confirm that the woman's heart has stopped, which they do reluctantly. Now all that remains is to wait for her resurrection. At that very moment, the Mormon elder rings the doorbell, looking for the girls. Reed locks all the internal doors, and the elder fails to hear their screams. Meanwhile, the girls' bicycles have vanished. Desperate, the girls pull a rug toward the door to retrieve a box of matches lying on it. Meanwhile, the elder leaves, and Reed returns to the study, but then the doorbell rings again. Barnes manages to grab the box of matches, standing at the door is the elder once again. Meanwhile, the girls turn to the prophetess and notice, to their horror, that she appears to have moved. The elder hands Reed a pamphlet from their church and leaves. The girls attempt to light the matches, but are terrified when they see the prophetess suddenly coming to life. She begins sharing a vision of the afterlife. Reed returns and asks the girls to recount what they saw, ready to record their testimonies, which will become part of his proof of the afterlife. Paxton repeats incoherent words about angels, and Reed assures them he will show them God by killing them. But it will only be temporary, as they too will be resurrected. Suddenly, Barnes declares that she experienced clinical death at the age of 4. She saw the same thing as his prophetess: blinding white light, clouds, and an overwhelming desire to return. She insists it wasn't a prophecy, but a typical hallucination from a near-death experience. Therefore, Reed killed the woman for nothing. She signals Paxton to attack. However, before Paxton can do anything, Reed unexpectedly slashes Barnes's throat. Paxton runs upstairs, screaming and pounding on doors. Realizing it's futile, she returns to find Reed sitting beside Barnes's body, claiming that she, too, will return from the dead. He pulls a metallic object from her hand, declaring it proof that Barnes was artificial and that they are all living in a simulation. Paxton recognizes it as a contraceptive implant and argues that his theory cannot be proven. Reed agrees, but he points out that it's like all religions. You either believe or you don't. Paxton accuses Reed of orchestrating the entire scene and swapping out the prophetess's body when the doorbell rang. She recalls that the prophetess was in a different position. Another woman must have entered through a hidden door to replace the deceased one and deliver a pre-written account of the afterlife, including the unexpected statement that it wasn't true. To cover this up, Reed killed Barnes. Determined to prove herself right, Paxton finds a hidden passage leading out of the basement, but she stumbles into an even darker dungeon filled with demonic ritual artifacts and women locked in cages. Reed catches up to her and demands her conclusion about the one true religion. Paxton realizes that as soon as they entered the house, Reed took their keys, unlocked their bikes, and hid them. He did all of this to convince them that the only true religion is the desire to control others. Reed approves of her conclusion, explaining that the women in the dungeon are there because it was their choice. He tells her that she too has spent her life obeying others' commands. Even the church decided what underwear she would wear, referring to the magic garments. Hearing the code phrase, Paxton stabs Reed in the neck with the letter opener and attempts to escape through the disbelief door, but she ends up back in the same dungeon where Barnes's body lies. Reed, fatally wounded, catches up to her and stabs her. Bleeding out, Paxton begins to pray, not for herself but out of mercy. Just as Reed prepares to finish her off, Barnes rises and delivers a fatal blow to Reed with the wooden board before collapsing and dying once more. Paxton escapes to freedom, but when she stops outside, a butterfly briefly lands on her hand, a poignant response to her earlier wish to transform into a butterfly and visit her loved ones. Despite the film being a horror story, it leaves every viewer with an opportunity to reflect on their faith, ideals, and whether the one true religion is control.